Hello, wonderful friends, and welcome to Manning Road's Prayer for Lunch as part of our online services during South Africa's COVID virus pandemic lockdown. Today, we are looking again at the passages we analyzed on Sunday, which is John 10, which is Jesus as the Good Shepherd, and Psalm 23. And I hope this will be an exciting re-embrace of these two particular passages. So as we look at Psalm 23 and John chapter 10 again, I would like to point out that Psalm 23 is actually a psalm that was re-edited and reconditioned and worded and put together within the struggle of the exile, a time in which the people of Israel were invaded by the Babylonians and taken away into a foreign land. And the people who were left behind without viable land and leaders. And it is in this time that the book of the Psalms is edited into its final form, but it's also in this time that the old songs of salvation and faith and struggle and God and the human story kind of invade the imaginations of the priestly class one more time. And they write and shape their songs and their praise and their prayers and their rituals around the questions that the exile brings to them. And the foremost question the exile brings is, how do you live an abundant life, a life full of God, a full life, a whole life, a life that holds the shalom promise of God in the midst of an exile, in the midst of struggle, in the midst of unpredictability, and in the midst of the world throwing some really huge curveballs at you. And so today we attempt to answer those or wrestle with that question in our theme, A Full Life. Join me now as we begin our time together with a reading of John chapter 10, verses 7 to 10. So again Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep do not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I come that they may have life and have it abundantly." This last line, "I come that they may have life and have it abundantly," is the whole turning point of the gospel. It's the whole point of the crucifixion and the resurrection. It's the whole point of the various times that Jesus appeared to the disciples and the women. It's the whole point of Jesus appearing in the upper room and Jesus invading those Emmaus journeys. He comes in the risen form that we may have life and have it abundantly. So as is customary now that we meet online, and that as a way of reminding us of our actual community, we light candles. We light candles to remind us that we are not alone. And we light candles to remember people and give thanks to the millions of lives that we are connected to. So today I invite you to light candles, to remind yourself that you are connected to something so much bigger than just now. We light this candle in the name of the Good Shepherd, in the name of the word that leads us into restoration, whose fold is bigger than time and physical boundaries, whose voice, whistle, and resurrection rustle is louder than fear and dread, whose table of abundance is present in good pasture as well as dark valleys, whose rod and staff are bold signposts in stormy places and on bright days. In the name of the Word, whose uttered syllables fall over all our lives and offer healing like unstoppable, lazy, moving, unctuous oil, dripping into every wound, over every scar. We light this candle in the name of the Good Shepherd. O shepherd-shaped God, whose word is a staff, whose love is a rod, leading us into grace upon grace. May our souls look up from the overwhelming, from the small, from the immediate and the urgent, from the dark valley and the shadows. May our footfalls follow your paths. May our beings find joy in your presence, like a rich banquet, no matter where our journey takes us. In a few moments, we're going to be listening to Leonard Bernstein's Chittisa Psalms. We're listening to the second movement, which is a mix-up of Psalm 23 and Psalm 2. As the song progresses, and as we get to the part where the psalmist begins to talk about the dark valleys and the shadow of death, Leonard Bernstein interjects the text with Psalm 2, which talks about how nations rage against nations. I believe that this particular rendition or poetic and musical outspeaking of the psalm is actually true to the text. Psalm 23, written in the context of Israel's own history of exodus and exile and being a nation under constant stress, politically, economically, and even just to eke out a daily living on an arid space. This particular psalm holds the uncertainties and the unpredictability of what life like that means. So, in the midst of it, in the center of the psalm, when Leonard Bernstein inserts the Psalm 2, he's beginning to unpack the political implications and the economic implications found within the psalm. We will be listening or exploring that a bit later in our reflection, but now I ask you just to listen out for the constant refrain that is echoed by the young soprano voices in the midst of it all. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, which is then said to us in a simple phrase, Adonai rori lo echsa. We have been on quite a journey during this time of lockdown. It is strange that while we are talking about resurrection and Jesus coming to us in his full body, his resurrected body, and asking people to touch and to breathe over them, we live in this ironic space where we can't touch, and we are uncomfortable with people now breathing over us. It's weird. It's almost like as if we have lost our body language. And in a way, we kind of grieve our incarnation, our ability to be flesh. But there are some interesting points in the resurrection stories that lead us to this ultimate line that Jesus comes to offer us life and offer us life in its abundance. You see, Jesus comes into a locked room, and he doesn't just bring a platitude of peace or religious kind of, moment. He brings the invitation of recreation, and this recreation comes to us in breath, in the activity of receiving from Yahweh and giving into Yahweh again, kind of like in the Genesis passage. It also comes to us in forgiveness. And forgiveness is not just about a long list of sins that we have done, but it's literally an invitation to reimagine who we are. We are caught up in cycles of guilt and shame, caught up in cycles of eye for an eye, where we seek retribution for wrongs that have been done to us and wrongs that we have done to others. And we seek the cyclic justice. And the cyclic justice does not bring us to wholeness. Instead, Jesus comes and intersects that cycle, that locked room, and says, if you want to live, learn how to breathe and learn how to forgive. And sometimes that kind of language and that kind of invitation is very scary. And so we tend to run away from it and kind of say that kind of thing is just completely naive. And so we join the disciples on yet another backwards and forwards journey as they journeyed to and from Emmaus in this crazy kind of cycle of re-understanding what Jesus came to invite them to. And we come to this moment. You see, when the disciples come back to Jerusalem and come back to those spaces where they meet with the 11 and they talk about the resurrection and they begin to digest and reimagine this invitation to full life that God is offering them in the risen Christ, they begin to understand that what is going to be required from them is a way of life and a way of living that breaks all those cycles of guilt and shame and cycles of hate and cycles of violence, and invites people into a journey where they remake the world with a new perspective altogether. What I find really interesting is that the risen Christ comes with holes and with scars. And so the question I leave with you and the question I bring to you is, how are we to live an abundant life with holes and scars? How are we to embrace this full life with holes and scars? And this is where I think our analysis of Psalm 23 is a gift to us. These words of Jesus are not just innocent words. They are words filled with deep subversive meaning. They are words that were actually bringing critical judgment onto the very systems of the people of Israel at the time in which he was living. Jesus is drawing on the rich imagery of the idea of God as shepherd. And now this particular way of thinking is not unusual to the people of Israel. In fact, it forms part of the people of all of that region. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, the Philistines, the whole of the Mesopotamian space often would use the imagery of God as or of the king as a shepherd that would lead their people into justice and lead their people into flourishing, lead their people into a full life. So when Jesus starts making these comments, I am the good shepherd, I am the gate for the sheep, I come that you may have life and have it abundantly. They are not just spiritual statements. They are statements that have deep, deep impacts on the political realities that people faced every day. He was basically saying that the way Herod and Herod's sons and the aristocracy of the time in which he lived shaped the community of the people of Israel was not life-giving. He was basically saying that the way in which the Pharisees and the Sadducees shaped the way in which people lived was not life-giving. He was bringing critique to how the Roman government was keeping the people of Israel in spaces of dehumanization. In the resurrection lens, or with the resurrection lens, we begin to see how the understanding of forgiveness and the idea of going back and embracing our vulnerabilities and our wounds and standing in those places to proclaim and to start something new. It becomes part of a new way of engaging with the political and economic systems that were keeping people so down. This was going to be the work of the early church, to question what the state was saying about who they were and their value, to question what old religious systems packaged in the temple cult of the Pharisees and the Sadducees would say about the value of human life. And so this simple statement, to say the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, is not just an innocent, naive statement. It's a statement that grounds people's living into a practice of who God is, that completely undoes and unearths and recreates what we do to ourselves. This simple statement, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, grounds us in the activity of this creating, forgiving, grace-giving God. It grounds us in the action of what it means to live justly, to live in a way that is flourishing and abundant, even in the midst of what is scary and scarce. And so in the psalm, when the psalmist talks about the valleys of the shadow of death, and in the wrestle with what that means for people's existence, the psalmist is speaking about grounding yourself in a way of being that doesn't allow you to become a product of the shadows of death and of the darkness. And this is what Jesus' invitation is to the early church. This is the invitation that Jesus brings to the disciples in the resurrection appearances. To live a full life, to participate in life from the generosity of a forgiving, grace-giving God. This is our task as we wrestle with what it means to be a church who lives in the midst of pandemic. So while we hold these questions, and none of these things are easy, and I cannot possibly bring simple solution, I invite you now into a time of prayer as we hold ourselves in all honesty before the Good Shepherd who holds us all. Let us pray together. In moments of flourishing, in moments of struggle, in moments of growth and consolidation, in moments of rest and on the journey, the Good Shepherd, the presence of the spoken first word resonates through it all. We hear another hospital closed down, hundreds of people testing positive. We hear the recording of death. And in facing an isolated grief, the pressure of sanitizing and watching what you touch and wearing face masks is hard. The simple monotony of home, the irony of standing still while facing change upon change, trying to plan in the midst of not knowing, trying to adjust dreams of school, of life, work, university when everything is in limbo, trying to find hope in the midst of hunger and uncertainty is hard. Trying not to give up when living at home and home is dangerous is hard. How do we make sense of life that comes in times like this? How do we sing the Lord's song in this strange landscape? And yet, in moments of deep connection and intimate fellowship, in moments of solitude and separation, in moments of lonely recurring questions and longings, the Good Shepherd, the presence of the first spoken word, resonates through it all. I invite you now to say together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So friends, we come to the end of our prayer for lunch this Wednesday afternoon. And I hope that God's presence and shalom and invitation to abundant life will be yours. I invite you now to share in this blessing. May our God lavish abundance over you when your hearts are weighed down by lack. May our God pour thick healing oil over you when your hearts are broken and life is bruising. May our God lead you into life in all its fullness, even when it seems impossible. We'll see you again on Friday for our Friday morning meditations. Until then, grace and love and light to you all.